my god, I have a jacket.
Dude, one of the dudes.
Really?
Anderson, I still don't trust you. I will never trust you.
You were like the most untrustworthy.
Exactly, that's the point. Now, we're going to pick up from where we left off, but today we're going to see a big shift in how this war takes place. But before we get to that, I do just kind of want to emphasize a couple of things. Once again, how this war is different from what we've fought in the past. And it's actually kind of one of the big problems. It's a 360-degree battlefield. You don't know who the enemy is, yet we're still stuck there. We are fighting against this idea, and we don't know who to trust. So we're stuck fighting against these guerrillas, and what we're going to be seeing at home is that the media and the government keep saying, no, we're winning the war. Yeah, it's taken us longer than we thought, but we're winning. Because look at all of the bodies that we have. We are honestly determining who's winning the war by kill ratio, where we're going to say, well, we killed 12-1. In some instances, it's even bigger. We have killed 25-1. We're winning the war. It's just a matter of time. This is kind of the inherent problem, is the American public is hearing, yeah, we're winning the war. It's just a matter of time. But the time keeps dragging out. Now, you have to kind of remember, this is what the guerrillas want. They want the war to drag out. The longer it drags out, the less likely that superior opponent is to continue fighting. They want the war over fast. If you can drag it out, you start to lose support at home. And if you lose support at home, the war's going to come to an end. What we're going to start seeing, even just as we begin escalating our involvement, is the American public starts saying, we don't want this war. We don't want to be a part of it for multiple different reasons. Now, there are going to be some hotbeds where we see these anti-war protests start to spring up. We're going to see them in major cities, and we see them on college campuses. Now, there's a few reasons really as to why they're going to spring up in these areas, but I want to focus on one in particular. Why do you think these protests are happening on college campuses? Probably a few reasons, but what do you think? Everyone, what do you think?
It's right near the enlistment age.
Okay, you're absolutely right. If you're going to enlist, or if you're going to be drafted, you got to be 18 years old. Average age for soldiers at this point is about 24 years old. So in college, you're right about that age range. So age is a part of it, certainly. What else do you think maybe? Suggest something else?
Not only are they being drafted, but there's like their family, and they kind of have like more information available.
What do you mean?
Well, since they're studying something, they have more information generally available.
Okay.
Also, since they are at that age of enlistment, a lot of like their friends are being drafted in.
Okay.
People talk.
Sure, absolutely. I think that's a good way of saying it too. Now let me kind of say it like that. Yeah, want to keep something else?
Never.
College campuses are usually a general location for people who are on the left side of the political spectrum. College campuses are usually a very liberal place. They're going to protest the war, saying that we don't want to be a part of this. Now, I will tell you this little story. My dad was in college during the Vietnam War. And during this time, if you were in college, you were exempt from the draft. So if you're in college, you have a way to get out of being drafted. My dad Actually, I should say it like this. My dad went to the Air Force. He went and volunteered for the Air Force. My dad was an airline pilot. He always wanted to fly. So he goes to the Air Force and volunteers. They said, okay, your eyesight's good, your physical's fine, you can fly airplanes. We're going to train you. Anything else you need to tell us? I kid you not, this is what my father told me. He said, well, yeah, I'm allergic to horses. They go, oh no, we can disqualify you now. You're out. A weird thing, but they had plenty of people who wanted to be pilots. So when he said he was allergic to horses, he's out. Now, he thought it was bizarre too, but any kind of thing that makes them eligible to disqualify you, they'll take. So if you're interviewing for the Air Force, don't tell them about you're allergic to horses, okay? My dad goes to college. He went to CU, and my dad was awful at Spanish. He had an F in Spanish going into his final exam. And he went to his professor and said, look, if I get an F in this class, they'll kick me out of school and I'll be eligible for the draft. And his professor told him, I guess this is an important test then, isn't it? If you fail it, you're going to Vietnam. So when you get mad at me for your final, I will go ahead and ease your mind. If you fail your final, you will not go into a war zone. Oh, Anderson, hang on a sec. Let me see what I can do for you, okay? There are going to be several different reasons why this war is so unpopular at home. Now, I can highlight a handful of these. First one is going to be just the escalation of it. The more and more Americans that are in country make this a public relations problem. American people don't want to hear about American soldiers dying in Vietnam. Now, we're okay with the idea of just bombings. The bombings, not rarely, but very less so, are people hurt or killed. Very rarely are families back home affected by bombings taking place on the other side of the world. You're not losing your son in bombing raids. But boots on the ground, these men who are getting snapped by these traps and coming home without a leg, that doesn't play well. The more and more Americans in country means more people are affected. When they start seeing casualties, it doesn't go well. Next thing is, this war, like I say, is different from any other war we've fought before. Every other war we've fought, we could look at a map and say, here's where we are, here's where we were, we're advancing. Things are going well. We are taking more and more territory, we're on our way to Berlin, whatever it is. In Vietnam, that doesn't happen. You can't look at the map and say, well, we control this area and we're pushing back. Whenever you try to do that, you're just infiltrated with the guerrillas. So there's no real way of saying we're winning other than body count. Now, yeah, if you look at a 25-to-1 kill ratio, you say, oh yeah, we're winning the war. Well, then why is it still going on? This is the disconnect the American public has with the government and the media as to what's going on with this war. And the last one is something that we've talked about in the past, something that has really a double-edged sword. The television. This is the first war where there are war correspondents, reporters, right next to American soldiers, and they are literally filming the war as it's happening. They are in these battles with these soldiers, and it's beamed into the American living room every single night. When you can watch it on TV, now you have visuals. Now you see what these soldiers see. And the American public starts saying, why are we even there? What are we doing? People are going to start to resist the military draft. Now I will go ahead and explain. My dad had some trouble with Spanish and figured, I'm either going to get drafted or I need to volunteer. So he went and volunteered. He volunteered for the Air Force, and he did some very low-level stuff because of his horse allergy. I know, very bizarre. He goes into the Air Force, and he is there, and he never actually went to Vietnam. He stayed in the United States, but he served in the Air Force for I think it was 2 or 3 years, if I remember right. And he did some things in order to really not go into the draft. The draft is basically taking people and you put them in the infantry. If you're drafted, you're going into Vietnam. You're boots on the ground. So the draft is going to start to see resistance. Now, resisting the draft is something that can put you in jail. If you're drafted and you don't show up, it's a felony. You go to prison unless you have another option. We're going to see probably about, because you never really know, but probably about 500,000 American men leave the country and go to Canada to avoid the draft. Now, I will tell you this little story because a close friend of mine, a guy who I grew up with, his dad, he was a grunt in Vietnam. He was boots on the ground. And his dad is a tough individual. Now, I will say this, my entire life he's been nothing but friendly to me, but as long as I've known this guy, he's never smiled. I've never known, he is not warm and fuzzy by any means. There was one time where my friend and I were talking to his dad about his experience in Vietnam, and he said that he saw and did things he could have never even imagined possible. So I asked him, and maybe this was foolish on my part, but I said, well, what happens if the draft comes again? What happens if my friend Greg gets drafted? And his dad said, I would drive you to the border with Canada today. I would drop you off there and I would tell you it's time to make a decision. Are you going to stay or are you going to go? And I hope your decision would be you go. Now that's a guy who saw what was taking place in Vietnam. He was there. And he said, I hope you would resist the draft. Now, he's one story. I'm not painting with a very broad brush. That's one instance. But we're going to see this resistance start to boil over. Now, there's an example of this taking place on a particular college campus where there is an anti-war rally taking place. Now, the rally itself was peaceful. It was a protest by college students. The protest was against the Vietnam War until things started to kind of spiral out of control. This protest starts to ramp up, and it gets to a point where these protesters turn violent. In fact, these protesters are going to take things way too far, and they're actually going to burn down a building on the campus of Kent State. Now, I'll ask you guys, have you heard of Kent State before? Just the university itself? Kent State's in Ohio, and it's a pretty big university. It's not massive, but it's pretty big. It's off the top of my head, probably about 25,000 people go there now. This protest starts to get bigger and bigger, and they start to kind of make some moves that look very dangerous. These protesters are going to burn down the Reserve Officer Training Corps building on Kent State's campus. Now, the Reserve Officer Training Corps, or ROTC, most universities have this. This is a way for kids that are college age to get some military training. Now, they're not exactly in the military. It's a program really to kind of train them for that. Now, in order to get this, you have to apply, you have to fulfill their rules, but the ROTC will pay for at least some of your college tuition. They are now the symbol on Kent State's campus of the military. So these protesters burn down the building. Now I'll go ahead and ask you guys, does this sound like a peaceful protest anymore? These protesters are going to cross that line. So the mayor has to get involved. The mayor of this town is going to do probably what he should have done. He calls in the National Guard. He calls in the state militia. And the mayor says, I'm bringing in more force to really just scatter this mob. If you burn down a building, you no longer have First Amendment protection. It's not a peaceful protest. He calls in the National Guard, and these protesters start throwing rocks at the National Guardsmen. Armed state militia.